Okay, it's 9 o'clock, and I want to say good morning and welcome to our third and final day of the 2025 Behavioral Health Crisis Continuum Forum. I'm Dr. Lorrie Rickman Jones, Director of the Behavioral Health Crisis Hub at the University of Illinois, Chicago, Jane Addams College of Social Work. If you joined us for one or both of the prior 2 days of this forum, we appreciate you being with us again. And if this is your first day with us, we are excited to have you. We have been lucky enough to feature 40 speakers in this year's virtual forum, hearing from both those living with behavioral health diagnosis, clinicians, researchers, clergy, and other subject matter experts. This work cannot be successful if we work in silos, and we truly appreciate every single person's contribution to this exciting event. Today, we will be discussing the importance of innovation in this work, including advances in technologies and collaborative approaches to addressing behavioral health crisis and care. With that, I want to take this moment to thank our event sponsor, the Illinois Department of Human Services, and our event project manager, Sara of SASU Project Management. I'm also grateful for the opportunity to show off our incredible Behavioral Health Crisis Hub team as shown here. Like I said before, this work cannot be done in silos, and this talented group of individuals have dedicated their time to this event through content development, production, and moderating contributions. Thank you, team. You are amazing. So before we jump in, a few housekeeping items. For today's event, like in the prior days, we'll be using the Zoom events platform. You're welcome to access an agenda for today and full speaker bios via the resources icon at the bottom of your screen. All participants will be muted and their videos turned off, allowing the audience to focus on the presenter and slides throughout the morning session. You're welcome to use the chat feature to direct message to the host or Hub team member Aaron for any tech-related questions. To ask questions of the speakers, I want to emphasize that you to please use the Q&A icon also made available at the bottom of your screen and not the chat. This is important as we hope to have time to answer your questions live during the forum sessions. Posting your questions to the Q&A section on Zoom will allow speakers to respond in written form if answering live is not possible. Lastly, your voice matters to us. We ask that you please take a moment to complete the evaluation for today's sessions at the end of the event. You'll receive more information on how to participate during our wrap-up later. So let's quickly review our agenda for this morning. We will start with presentations and a panel discussion on the innovation of chat and text in 988. Then we will move on to a discussion on technological advances through the lens of digital technologies and artificial intelligence. After a short break in video, we will close out the morning hearing about the importance of building successful collaborations from the perspective of the wellness and recovery community, and wrap up with a panel on building collaboration at the local level for alternative response. So let's begin. It's my pleasure to introduce the moderator for our first session, Mr. Craig Williams. Craig is a consultant with the UIC Behavioral Health Crisis Hub and assists with the strategic management and oversight of the Illinois 7 Lifeline Contact Centers, and formerly served as an administrator with the Illinois Department of Human Services Division of Mental Health. Craig will introduce the speakers for the session, so please join me in welcoming Craig. Good morning, Craig.
Good morning, and thank you for that kind introduction. I want to get started right away because after the first 2 days, I had hit the point of saturation. Such amazing speakers, and when I look down the list of speakers today, I know I'm going to hit that point once again. So this session is over chats and texts for 988, and what we are experiencing is that our children, young adults, and our most vulnerable populations tend to gravitate to these modalities. And as a result, in order for us to reach our most vulnerable populations, we need to increase our capacity with chats and texts. So again, with the housekeeping, Dr. Jones did a great job. If you have Q&A, please use your Q&A function at the bottom of the screen, and we'll try to get to that during this session. So To start things off, we have two presentations. The first presentation will be by Kelly Bombardiere. She is Vice President of Crisis Services with Centerstone. And the second presentation will be by Sara Carter Mills, who's Chief Crisis Officer at PATH, and Dr. Adam Carter, who is CEO of PATH. So without further delay, Kelly, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. My name is Kelly Bombardiere, and I'm the Vice President of Crisis Services. So I have been with Centerstone for over 11 years, and my background has primarily been in telephonic and face-to-face crisis interventions. So when 988 launched in 2022, I have really had the pleasure of learning the chat and text side and even built a national chat and text backup center that supports these individuals who either prefer or require nonverbal communication. Today, I'm going to talk about the differences in providing text-based services, as well as some unique challenges and opportunities that come with it. Next slide, please. So text-based crisis services represent a growing shift in how people seek help. For many individuals, especially youth and young adults, text can feel safer, more anonymous, and easier to access than speaking out loud. Often, it can be a lot easier to write out how you're feeling instead of trying to communicate the words to describe the emotion. What we've learned over time is that text-based support isn't just a convenience, it is a lifeline. And like any lifeline, it really does require skill and strategy and strong systems behind it in order to be effective. One of the biggest differentiators between phone and text conversation is the duration. So while a voice 988 call may last anywhere from 10 to 15 minutes, a single text conversation can extend well beyond that. So often 45 minutes or more. And this can be for multiple reasons: the way that people type, how long it takes to reflect in real time. Rapport can take a lot longer to build when you're not speaking face to face or when you're not able to hear someone's emotional state. And individuals can also be multitasking and put their phone down or walk away from their computer. Another critical difference is etiquette and tone. Tone is really hard to interpret via text, especially in emotionally charged situations. I think we can all think of a time when maybe we weren't in the best mood and we received a text message or an email. We tend to read it how we're feeling. So without being able to rely on vocal inflection, staff who provide text-based services have to really rely on seeking clarity and using empathy, and also, being mindful and intentional in word choice. A simple phrase like, "Are you okay?" could feel both intrusive or supportive depending upon context. So that's why we really do have to train crisis staff extensively on emotional mirroring and validation. Also asking open-ended questions. Small things like using an emoji in the wrong way or assuming what an acronym means can make or break trust in a conversation. And it would be nearly impossible to expect all crisis staff to know every slang word that someone is going to use. So we definitely have to be mindful again and train them to say, "I'm not familiar with insert, word or emoji. Can you tell me what that means to you?" Another difference in text-based conversation is when it comes to the wrap-up, and things can get even more delicate here. Unlike a phone call, which usually has a natural conversational rhythm, ending a text conversation can often feel really abrupt, and can even be triggering if it's not handled carefully. So the goal is to leave the person with a sense of empowerment and next steps, whether that's through developing a safety plan together, providing a referral, or even just being a voice on the other end that is saying you are not alone. However, text-based conversations often end without a clear sense of even when the person walked away from their keyboard or their phone. With audience and intensity, most of our chat and text users are younger, typically under the age of 25, and these conversations are often high emotional intensity. They can range from anything from "I had a bad day" to suicidal ideation, to someone experiencing abuse, to individuals who are experiencing deep isolation. So to support staff in providing text-based services, we do have 24/7 clinical support, and we also allow regular debriefings to allow space to talk about the challenges of these interactions, especially for those who end without a resolution. Next slide, please. So I think it's important to understand kind of the routing of text-based conversations versus phone calls. So while telephone calls are routed via geo-routing, which will route the caller to the closest center based on their physical location, chat and text conversations are routed differently and also based on how pre-conversation questions are answered. So if you reach out, there are 2 required pre-conversation questions, which is usually the only snapshot of information crisis staff then have to kind of build rapport off of it. We're going to learn whether or not the individual identified thoughts of suicide, and if they did, if those thoughts were within 24 hours or within 2 months. And then we're also going to see a number between 1 to 5 of how upset that individual is when they rate themselves. If you are chatting into 988, you have to put your zip code, and that is how your conversation is routed. And if you are texting into 988, your conversation is going to be routed via your area code. So there is a high likelihood in text-based conversations that you're not going to reach a local center, especially if you're someone like myself who's had the same phone number since I was 16 and I no longer live in that state. So after you've answered those pre-conversation questions, your interaction will route to a local queue, a state queue that supports chat and text. And if 60 seconds pass and that interaction is not answered, or if your state doesn't have a local center, it then routes to a national backup center to ensure coverage if that local center is either full or unavailable. Next slide, please. So this slide is just a big screenshot that shows all of the total outreach for 988 from launch of July 2022 through February 2025. So on average, tens of thousands of conversations are taking place each month, and that trend is only growing. I think that this reflects both greater awareness and a greater need for text-based services, especially to support young people. Next slide, please. So if we're zooming in on monthly trends, we've definitely observed consistent spikes around certain times of year since launch. For instance, we do see higher volume when it's back to school season, when there are holidays, and even daylight saving time has tended to correlate with increased distress for some individuals. So we can use this data to anticipate staffing needs and provide real-time support and also prepare staff for the emotional demands of those peak periods. Next slide, please. This view of data shows February 2025, which is the last month that is available on SAMHSA's data dashboard. And I wanted to include this because I do feel like it really highlights the success, such as a 95% answer rate for chats and a 99% answer rate for text. While we would obviously love to see 100%, I really do think that we're going to get there in order to continue providing this critical services to those that prefer text-based conversation. Next slide, please. But of course, with all demand for text-based services, challenges do exist. So one of the biggest ones is staffing and workforce limitations. The longer duration of text conversation definitely means fewer contacts per counselor per shift compared to someone who's taking a phone call. You add in the emotional toll of chat, especially when you can't hear someone's voice, and we've definitely seen the burnout risk rise. So it's really important that recruiting, training, and even retaining qualified chat and text counselors remains a top priority. Something that I definitely think has helped us in this work is allowing for our staff to work remotely, and then also utilizing PRN staff and offering flexible, shorter shifts to support workforce sustainability, and also scheduling of necessary meetings to talk about maybe frequent visitors into the service or operations or any clinical trends that we're seeing. Another challenge with text-based conversations is technology, right? Even minor glitches can cause major disruptions, and I think we've all experienced that at one point or another. So imagine your computer freezing, your internet going out, or your cell signal getting cut in the middle of an important conversation. Tech issues can happen for both the user and crisis staff, which can make it difficult to connect. And sometimes there's just a lag and a delay. Additionally, the unified platform, which is used to receive all chats and texts, can automatically end a conversation at the 5 and the 7 minute mark if a user hasn't responded. So to help staff with technology issues, we provide all of our staff MiFis. So if they do lose internet, the connection won't disconnect. However, there are still outages that are outside of our control. I think it was a few months ago when all of Microsoft went down, which affected all of our computers. And obviously, in providing this service, you are needing a computer in order to receive them. Another challenge with text-based conversations is anonymity. So while it's definitely a strength of chat and text services, it can also limit our ability to intervene during high-risk situations. So text-based users often avoid giving their location, making it really difficult to dispatch individuals at imminent risk. Often we have to build trust using empathy and patience, which is the only way to get the information that we need. And while we can see an IP address of a chatter, and we do have relationships with police to try to locate that individual using the IP address, it isn't always successful. And especially with youth and young adults, they're tech savvy. Some even use a VPN to hide their location. And like I mentioned, if it was a texter using their phone and their area code, they may not even live where their area code is based out of. So this is definitely a challenge. And then finally, volume and demand. Obviously, with the demand of young people wanting to reach out to text-based services, spikes in volumes can lead to really long wait times and individuals disconnecting before getting the help that they're seeking. And these spikes can happen at any time and with very little notice and put a strain on available staff who want to be able to support everyone who reaches out. To support an all hands on deck approach, all of our staff, whether they're a manager, director, clinical supervisor, or quality assurance, are trained to provide crisis services in text-based scenarios and can hop on to assist. We also use a technology that's called Sling, that is shift-based scheduling system that allows us to communicate the need for additional shift coverage. What we like about this is that staff are able to go in and say, yes, I'm willing to be contacted outside of my regular working hours. If you were to contact me, I would want that to be through an email, or I would want it to come through the app. And then you can send out mass alerts saying, hey, we're seeing a huge surge in volume, who's available? And staff can actually apply for that shift. And then it goes directly routed to their supervisor, who can then approve that shift in live time and make an automatic update to the Sling software. It also allows staff who may need a last minute day off or a mental health day to get coverage for their shift that wouldn't disrupt our ability to meet the needs of the community and to support that demand. Next slide, please. So this is just information about Centerstone. If you have any questions about text-based crisis services or anything that I've shared in the nuances between text-based services and telephonic services, feel free to reach out to me directly. Thank you.
Thank you, Kelly. And I see there is a question in the chat, but we will get to all questions following our next presentation. So without further delay, let's turn it over to Path with Sara and Adam.
Morning. So in a spirit of full transparency, I've lost the ability to see slides, so I'm just going to go through it and say next and hope it goes next. So we'll move together here together, friends. Again, my name is Adam Carter, and I'm the CEO here at Path, and I'm joined by Sara Carter Mills, who is our Chief Crisis Officer. Together, we have been at Path and have been working on the 988 implementation. Path has been part of it since the beginning, and so we are very excited to talk to you about the how we can expand access for individuals who historically faced barriers to traditional crisis support. Next, my friend. Text and chat-based crisis interventions are not simply optional features. They're essential components of an inclusive and responsive crisis system. We have research that indicates that over 70% of youth and young adults prefer digital communication over voice calls. For many, texting or chatting offers a sense of privacy, emotional distance, and safety that is simply just not possible through spoken conversation. This can be particularly vital in environments where speaking out loud may put someone at greater risk, such as situations involving domestic violence or when someone is physically or emotionally unable to speak due to distress, disability, or fear. Another example may be with our youth who are reaching out during school hours. It may not be something they can do and have a conversation while on the phone, but they may be be able to seek support that they're looking for through text chat in a non-vocal way during those hours. Next.
As we continue to analyze national local trends in 988 usage, we see distinct populations turning to text and chat services at higher rates. These include youth and young adults, LGBTQIA+ individuals, survivors of abuse or trafficking, people with disabilities such as deaf or hard of hearing individuals, and those who are neurodivergent. Each of these communities brings its own context, challenges, and needs, and each one finds value in having discrete, accessible ways to ask for help. Next slide, please. Among youth and young adults, text and chat are often the preferred communication channels. More than half of users who reach out to 988 via text or chat are under the age of 25. For this group, texting feels private and less intimidating than a phone call. It mirrors their daily communication habits and provides a space to share openly without the pressure of being heard or immediately responded to. Common topics among this group include school-related stress, identity questions, mental health struggles, and suicidal thoughts. Next slide, please.
The LGBTQIA+ community is another group for whom text and chat provides critical access. Nearly half of LGBTQ youth have seriously considered suicide, and 63% report that they would rather use text or chat than speak on the phone. For many, there's a fear of being misjudged, misunderstood, or even outed by the person on the other end of the line. Text and chat provides a level of anonymity and safety that fosters more honest and effective engagement, particularly from trans and non-binary youth. Next slide, please.
Survivors of domestic violence or trafficking often face unique barriers to help seeking. When someone is in a home or situation where speaking aloud could alert an abuser, text and chat become life-saving tools. These platforms allow users to communicate quietly, often while in the presence of danger, and can be the difference between isolation and connection. They also offer survivors greater sense of autonomy and control during a time when those feelings may otherwise be diminished. Next slide, please.
For individuals who are deaf or hard of hearing, phone-based crisis services have long been inaccessible or overly complicated. Relying on third-party interpreters or assistive devices can make reaching out for help feel burdensome or even impossible. Text and chat eliminate those barriers, offering a direct, equitable connection that is aligned with ADA standards and the principles of inclusive care. Next slide, please.
Finally, neurodivergent individuals, especially those with autism or anxiety, may find phone conversations overwhelming or difficult to process. The pace and unpredictability of verbal interaction can increase stress or inhibit communication. With text and chat, these users can take the time they need to form their thoughts, express themselves clearly, and engage in a way that respects their neurotype and needs. In summary, 988 text and chat services are not simply alternative methods of communication. They are vital access points that honor the diverse ways people experience crisis and seek support. They promote safety, equity, and dignity, especially for those who have too often been left out of the conversation. Meeting people where they are means offering support in the ways they are most comfortable and able to engage. Digital crisis response makes that possible. Thank you for your time and for your commitment to inclusive and compassionate crisis care.
Wow. So, oh, I'm sorry, Sarah, were you finished?
Yes, I was finished. Thank you.
So, two amazing presentations, so amazing that they answered all of the questions that I had written down. So I wanted to start by, just acknowledging that we have members of the mobile crisis team community here and also the PSAPs here. So I wanted to start by just asking, and I want to start with Sarah, if you can walk us through a scenario where you are handling a chat and text and it's just not de-escalating. So you get to a point that you need to make a referral to either a mobile crisis team or 911. How does that scenario look? And I think you're on mute now, Sarah. Still can't hear you. That's a question that anyone on the panel can answer. So feel free to jump in, Kelly or Adam. Well,
Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, I will try to answer this. So that definitely raises a challenge when you don't have someone's location. So if it is, I mean, it really is just a matter of asking a bunch of questions, trying to over-explain what mobile crisis response is, or find alternatives that are available to just make someone more comfortable with kind of disclosing that information to you. And then ultimately, we do have access to see the IP address that's in the platform. And there are some Peace apps that are able to use that and find a location and get an individual the assistance that they need. But again, it's not always successful. I have a VPN on my work computer because it is, our practice here. And a lot of other individuals also have VPNs, and that distorts where someone's located. So I think a lot of it is just conversation, maybe over explaining of what the resource is, why you're wanting to provide it, helping to hear maybe someone's challenges or stigmas that they have about what it would be like to use that service, and then just trying to use a lot of encouragement to get them to trust you.
I love that. So explain the process of a warm handoff from let's use a mobile crisis team. How do you conduct a warm handoff from a chat or a text to a mobile crisis team?
Sure. So we would have to ask for the individual to share their telephone number. So in the pre-conversation questions that I had talked about, there is an option for individuals if they are chatting in to add a phone number. And then obviously we can ask for consent to reach out for them. And we would have to do the same thing if it was text-based and we already had their number, but we're wanting to connect them to either a direct referral and a warm handoff or a mobile crisis provider.
That is great information. Adam, so we heard that the handle times for chats and texts are longer, 45 minutes as opposed to around 15 minutes for a phone call. Give us some reasons as to why these handle times tend to be longer with chats and texts.
Absolutely. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So some of the things that we're finding, and keep in mind that key word that you just used, Craig, that I want to make sure everyone understands is the word average, right? Is that we have some that are substantially shorter, and then we have some that are substantially longer. And so what we're looking at is that average. And the reason that's important for us at a contact center is it does directly impact staffing. So when we're looking at that 45-minute average, that is something we take into account when we're looking at staffing. Some of the reasons that may occur is as some of the things that both of my colleagues shared today is that one, individuals may require more time to be able to cultivate their thoughts. If we keep in mind some of the things that folks are sharing with us are things that they have never shared with another human being before. The thought about not wanting to be alive is one that we have, as a society, put a lot of shame around. And so taking the time to figure out how to say these things to someone I've never met before may take a few extra minutes to be able to communicate. Also, when you're looking at the demographic of individuals, if we're looking at over half of our folks are younger than 25 years old, we're also looking at some ability to be able to communicate and trust with the person who's on the other end of the line. So what do I need to do, right? I call it breadcrumbing, right? Where I'm gonna tell you this and see what you respond to. Then I'm gonna tell you this and see how you respond to that before working up to the fact of saying, well, what would you think if I told you I was hurting myself right now, right? And so it can take some time to build up that trust. And as Kelly shared, we're relying solely on what has been put onto the screen, and we're not able to use our other senses. So in some of those instances, being able to hear tone, hear crying, this is something we can't hear. We can't hear crying. We can't hear hyperventilating. We can't hear if there's other people in the space, and those things do take on some time. Specific incidents I'm thinking about, and I shared a little during my presentation, was we received a text chat and conversation. Specifically, this one was text, and the young person was at school. And so what was occurring is whenever they could sneak their phone out and they could have conversations, or whenever they could have their phone out, they were communicating with us. And it was done in a way where it was within the confines of what our process is on length of time between responses. Because if we do have to end a conversation, multiple notices are given in advance. So we're saying, we have not heard from you. Just because we haven't heard from someone doesn't mean it's an automatic disconnect. It means we've done our due diligence to say, hey, Craig, are you still there? Hey, Craig, we're going to disconnect in 5 minutes. And at 4 minutes, Craig writes back and says, I'm still here. That's enough for us to say, okay. And then it kind of resets, and not in a negative way, but it resets to allow that opportunity for the person to make some decisions and some thoughts. So with our young person who was at school, we were getting a lot of information where it was in short bursts between periods. We were getting a lot more information, but that's an example of one where as the service is becoming new, we're experiencing and we're exploring how to process that as well. So the length of time sometimes just comes into ability to type, to communicate, to express yourself. As Kelly shared, the use of emojis to kind of shortcut language, right? Of sending a emoji instead of writing an entire paragraph, but again, seeking clarification on that. All of those things take a little more time just to make sure that we're providing an accurate service.
And that's a great answer. One of the things that Kelly also shared was the increase in volume that we're seeing and expect for the future. So this is asked to the panel, how are we preparing to deal with the increase in volume? One of the questions DMH was asked by Vibrant earlier this week was, what is DMH's and the state's approach to concurrency, handling two chats and texts at the same time? So, I'd just like to hear, how are we better preparing for this increase in volume?
So I can start on this one again. So I feel like when it comes to handling two interactions at once, we do have some staff that do that. Ultimately, the general rule of thumb is in having a conversation, you should have already built enough rapport and gotten to the risk assessment questions and realized that there is not imminent risk on the table before starting another interaction, because you don't want to end up with two people who are actively trying to end their life because someone is not going to have your full attention. And that can happen in terms of, an individual reaching out and within 5 minutes you realize it is just someone experiencing emotional distress. They are not thinking about suicide. There is no risk for any type of self-harm, and it can be appropriate to bring another one again. But again, with conversations taking a lot longer, sometimes you don't know that until the 20, 25, 30-minute mark. And so there's that to consider. And then when it comes to the rest of just staffing for the demand, I think it really is just being honest with staff from a recruiting aspect about flexibility and about whether or not they are open to flexibility and shifts and maybe overtime opportunities, or adjusting a day if we see a need for the demand, and then using part-time or PRN shifts to kind of fill in those gaps.
And that's a great answer. Anything to add, Adam, Sara?
I was going to see if Sara can talk yet. Do you know?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Someone invited me back to the microphone. I must have messed that up. Sorry about that. No, I agree with everything that Kelly has said. I think flexibility with staff and making sure that they have all the support that they need. So like right now, we don't take two at a time because we're getting back oriented into it. But certainly allowing the space to like build up the skills and the confidence and really make sure on a quality side that we have things squared away before we take the next step. Because I think that's most responsible to our helpers and to the help seekers.
So I keep hearing.
Greg, can I just jump in real quick on that length of time too? Is that we at the call centers also have to be responsive to the different type of support that's needed for a longer conversation. So when someone is on a longer conversation, meaning this in this opportunity, our help provider, a longer conversation may require a different level of support for the person who's providing that support. So for example, if someone says, I'm in the process of hurting myself or ending my own life, and we say, hey, I want to check in, or we give a response and we don't hear anything, that takes an emotional toll on the person who is providing that help. And so you're waiting and you're waiting and you're waiting. Whereas we said before, on a voice call, we can hear things, right? We can hear a car in the background. On our voice calls, we can hear when our mobile response folks or our 911 providers or our police or fire department, we can hear when they knock on the door. Sometimes that knock on the door, you can actually see a relief on the call taker's face because they know there's someone there now, right? And the only reason they're there is because it was deemed imminent risk. They're not there just because someone was having a rough day. They're there because our call taker believed, and so did a manager, believed that they were at imminent risk. It is extremely difficult to take that and to process that with text only, because like we said, you text and you say, I have this bottle of pills here. We have a protocol to be able to talk about separating from that, and we sometimes can hear that. But if someone says, okay, I'm going to the bathroom to put the pills in the toilet, or I'm going to put the pills in the other room, and we don't hear back because let's say mom came home. Mom came home and mom is now talking to this person who initiated the text. Our help person may not know that. And so it's a different level of support that's also needed, as this starts to become an increasing way that individuals are accessing care.
That is great information. And, I keep hearing from everyone on the panel about the acronyms, the abbreviations, and the use of informal language. So when we talk about the workforce, is it difficult to get older people like me, Gen X, to be able to be hired into these roles to be able to understand these types of communications?
I don't think so. I think it's a matter of, making sure that people don't make assumptions about what something means, and to also have, the understanding that what something means to you, it could mean something completely different for me. So I think it's more from a training side of just, getting staff to be comfortable and saying, I'm not sure what that means. Can you share what that means to you?
Yeah. Additionally, I don't necessarily, I mean, yes, technology is a contributing factor to text and chat, but it also is to operate a phone system, answering Microsoft Teams or however you're communicating with each other. So I think training is really the focus as opposed to age or experience, and ensuring that your training is really built to address people at different learning levels.
And that's great that you bring up training, because like I at one point I had a cheat sheet of these abbreviations and acronyms for when the younger people in my family would text me. But then the issue is that it was outdated in about 2 weeks because there are constantly new terms. So how do you incorporate that into your training?
I think just keeping a running tab on, tasking our training team with keeping an eye on those things, being in touch ourselves, having refreshers often, building that in as a part of a regular daily conversation, finding ways to do that, so that there's ongoing exposure internally. We put a lot of emphasis on supporting our staff because we feel like that's the only way that good work is going to get done. It's a hard job, and they're doing it because they care. Otherwise, I don't think that they would be doing it. So just, any ways that we can do that. And I think training is a big one, professional development, giving them ongoing opportunities to learn what's new, what's a best practice, why are we doing this? So that's how we kind of approach it here.
That is great information. So one of the things that we hear nationwide and in Illinois is with the phone calls, 98% of those calls are de-escalated over the phone. Are we seeing the same with chats and texts, or are we experiencing higher lethalities in this mode of communication?
I will say we have not necessarily had any lethality since we began taking chat and text again, but we have had several, I would say, an increase in amount of support where we have to engage crisis services in some form or fashion, whether that's a crisis team or 911. And it just seems that by the time they're reaching out in text and chat, almost like so much has happened that it's harder, and it's probably because of all the things that we've talked about. You can't hear, it's harder to like gauge where someone's coming from emotionally, so you're just seeing it sounds scarier, sounds, because you're seeing what they're writing and it's very raw, so you can't tell how serious they sound, if there's any sort of hesitation in their voice. So I think that could also potentially lead to uh, maybe quicker engagement, or at least tending to want to, as opposed to like really breaking down and assessing further, as Kelly mentioned earlier. I mean, it just, you have to kind of get in there and see what is going on. And with limited information, that's hard. But I would say, just since we began doing it again for the last few months, there have been I've seen more engagement and have to review more of those than I would on our voice calls. So
And once again, great information. Um, I want to jump to familiar faces and abusive contactors. So I know that's a huge issue with the phones. Are we seeing similar issues with individuals abusing the system and familiar faces with chats and text also?
we have not had those two things come up quite yet. I imagine as we get kind of more people on shift and start taking more interactions, I would have better information about that, but it wouldn't surprise me. I think because of how routing works, I'm not sure about having familiar folks, but I don't know that we've had significant showing of abusive contacts compared
That
to the voice calls.
And part of
that is music to my ears.
part of that may be the psychology of the contact, right? Like, because sometimes it's our friend Kelly made a beautiful point when she said sometimes folks are calling because they need emotional support and they need to hear a voice and they need to be of support that may not be hitting the same parts of the brain in a text chat conversation. So being able to hear and also, and I'm sure you've covered this over multiple periods of time, but I feel inclined every space I'm in to say there is a difference between abusive callers and familiar voices, correct? Like someone who calls regularly, who is not a threat to our staff, is considered a familiar voice, whereas someone who is calling with the sole intention to be able to cause, I'm showing my age. I'm going to say mischief. If they're calling mischief, that's what we consider to be an abusive caller, and those we tend to see more vocally because you can get a rise out of someone. If you're calling to cause mischief, I can call in, I can kind of rile folks up. I can hear it on the other end. I can hear someone's voice. That's not occurring in text chat, and the responses seem a little more distant or potentially cold if what you're trying to do is get a rise out of someone. So that's what we're seeing currently. And if we have this conversation in a year's time, I would be surprised if we see an increase in, like, especially abusive contacts on text and chat for the reasons we outlined today.
That's certainly great information, and I'm happy to hear that we're not having those types of issues with chats and texts because of the length of handle time and the resources needed. So that is very comforting. The last thing I want to get to, and Kelly talked about this earlier with privacy and confidentiality concerns. And what are you hearing, especially from our children and young adults, as to their concerns with privacy and confidentiality? And also, how are the centers dealing with these concerns?
I'm sorry, I actually thought you directed that to Kelly, but I may have misunderstood.
Anyone can answer.
Oh,
All right. So Craig and I have had multiple conversations. My professional background and passion is children and adolescents mental health care, specifically crisis care. And what we are seeing is that idea of confidentiality is incredibly important. That there's instances where potentially some of the stressors could be systems that a child is part of. So we may have someone reach out and talk about and even disclose potential abuse, which we have policies for, we have processes for, we address, and that's a different conversation. But I want to let those know that that's not something that falls onto ears that do not do something with it. But that is a concern. It's what's going to happen and who's going to say. Kelly also made mention that we have youth who are way more tech savvy than any of us can even pretend to be. And so, as with VPNs or finding ways to access these services that do mask where they're calling from, they know more than we do. Most of us, rather. I'm sure there's tech folks in there, but I think that's an important piece to understand, is that children and adolescents both want and deserve autonomy in the services they're receiving as well, especially in the way 988 is designed, which is saying our goal is to empower the individual to feel in control, to be able to make choices, to get to the next day, to make another choice, right? That's what we're saying. We're giving you an opportunity. And so that confidentiality piece of it is huge. I've heard on all of these conversations today that we all have processes and policies in place that say just because we have access to a phone number doesn't mean we have permission to use it. And I think that's a key aspect of it. When we reach that imminent risk area, we do start to have a little more leeway and flexibility. But just because our system pops up a phone number doesn't mean that we have the right to call it back. And so those are some pretty important things to note. So for example, if a child calls and we then call back and a caregiver answers, we have things in place that kind of make mention of or kind of ask for without disclosing too much information. And it's the same thing would happen with someone who, for example, may be surviving or living with domestic violence, that you're reaching out and you may have your abuser who answers the phone. Privacy and confidentiality is going to be key on there. We're not necessarily going to start off with, hey, I was just talking to Sara and she said that she's thinking about killing herself. Do you know where she is? We have ways that we can address that and seek support and try to get Sara back on the phone without necessarily overtly disclosing who we are.
I absolutely love that. And I know, like you said, you have access to phone numbers, but with chats, how do you store information? Because I know we don't use names. How do you store information to keep record of that contact?
Oh, Kelly, you go first.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say the unified platform that houses everything assigns like a number to it. And then for centers that document in other systems, you can use that same number and any other identifying information that's shared.
And that's fantastic. I just wanted to highlight that 988 does not save names and share that type of information at all. So I want to thank Kelly, Adam, Sara for a fantastic presentations. And now I will turn it back over to Dr. Jones. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, panelists and Craig, for an incredible start to the morning. Your insights and experience and knowledge about what we can expect with chat and text in 988 has really been super helpful for those of us in the field who want to rely on this as a resource in our crisis continuum. Next, it's my pleasure to continue this focus on innovation as we welcome two incredible speakers, each with their own lengthy resume and research work in the area of technology and behavioral health. First, we welcome Dr. Dave Atkins. Dr. Atkins is the CEO of Lyssn, a technology company that develops AI software solutions to support training, quality assurance, and documentation needs for behavioral health and human service providers. Developed from NIH-funded research, Lyssn's AI software is used by public and private behavioral health providers, state and county child welfare jurisdictions, 988 providers, and digital health coaching providers. We also have joining us Dr. David Mohr, Professor of Preventive Medicine and Chief of Behavioral Medicine, Director of the Center for Behavioral Interventions Center for Behavioral Intervention Technologies, try to say that fast, and Chief of the Division of Behavioral Medicine at Northwestern University's Feinberg School of Medicine. Dr. Mohr has developed and evaluated numerous web-based mobile and text messaging interventions for depression and anxiety. His current work focuses on the design, evaluation, and sustainability of implementing digital mental health services in real-world healthcare settings. Thank you both for being here. And Dr. Atkins, I think we're going to start with you. So let me turn things over to you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. It is really delightful to be here, have an opportunity to both comment on AI in general and behavioral health care and crisis, and then also dig into a little bit of our research. Next slide, please. Just as I get started, I both want to, a little bit about me. I'm a clinical psychologist by background. I was a professor in the psychiatry department at the University of Washington for a number of years. Have had the pleasure to meet David a couple times and know of his fantastic work. And so just want to acknowledge both the generous support of NIH over the years that really has been foundational to what began in the universities and now continues at Lyssn, and also just to highlight, I am a co-owner of Lyssn. I'm not here to talk about our software commercial products, but just so that you know that in advance. Next slide, please. So wrestled a little bit with what all to include today. I'm going to comment just a bit on the cultural moment that we're having with AI. Spend most of the time talking about some of our research at developing AI and evaluating AI for crisis care, in particular 988 call centers. And then I'll end with a couple principles. I'll try to put myself in your shoes and think through, if I'm trying to make decisions about AI solutions, how should I be thinking about them? Should I be concerned? What concerns should I might have, and how can I make decisions moving forward? So that's where we're headed today. And next slide, please. So the cultural moment right now, there's all of this froth and excitement and hype. On one side of this, we have the proponents that are saying, AI is going to make everything better, and the statements can be awfully grandiose. Next slide, please. And we have an equally kind of warning at a fairly existential level in some cases, but there are also much more specific concerns as well about the ways that AI can scale up bias, examples of that. And so we kind of get caught between these two pillars of excitement and concern. Next slide, please. And I thought it was captured very well. So Gartner is a technology consulting group, and every year they put out what they call their hype cycle for emerging technologies. And if you could click on the next thing, please. And so here's generative AI, so our large language models and the excitement about ChatGPT. And it sits right now in their analysis between these two phases of the peak of inflated expectations and the trough of disillusionment. And I do think that kind of just captures where we're at. I think there is great potential, and there also, some of it truly is hype and froth, and we need a dose of reality in there. Next slide, please. So just to acknowledge that, there is a moment happening with AI, but if we kind of come down to earth and think about what is actually achievable, where could it potentially be useful with crisis care? So let's dig in on that, because that's where my own work and colleagues at Lyssn and partnership with Protocol Services has been focused recently. Next slide, please. Let me try to kind of walk you through how I think about it and how we have approached this. So one thing is, we know what is important in clinical conversations, whether that's crisis care or counseling or coaching or peer support. I've had the pleasure of getting to work with Terry Moyers and Bill Miller a bit in my professional life. Bill is the developer of motivational interviewing. Terry has been a leader in training and assessing motivational interviewing. And they have focused incredibly on empathy as one foundational component within the helping professions. And they think it is so important that they wrote this paper a few years ago saying that when it's not there, it's toxic. Next slide, please. Terry has devoted a big chunk of her life to how do we reliably measure what happens in these important conversations in counseling and crisis care and so on. And so she's demonstrated really well that we can measure reliably empathy as long as we train people really carefully. Next slide, please. And it's not only kind of big 1 to 5 scales for an entire conversation. We can get pretty granular. We can identify specific types of utterances, specific sentences that are highly empathic. These are often complex reflections where a provider, a call taker, is trying to express something that they're hearing, maybe the meaning or the emotional content of what's being said by the client or caller. Next slide, please. And so the fundamental problem, if we know what's important, we can actually measure it reliably. We can measure it at several scales of reliability. The fundamental problem is scale. We have historically used humans, used human evaluators to make these types of assessments. And so this was from last year's birthday for 988. And at that point, they noted that there had been 10 million contacts across calls, chats, texts. The idea that we would, if gold standard would be to evaluate each and every one of those and provide some feedback for training, for supervision, for quality assurance, trying to think about doing that with people is just mind-boggling. And so it creates, at a 30,000 foot view, we have a certain black box problem with behavioral health care, that all of these important conversations, next slide, please, including in crisis care, like when it goes well, when that 988 call goes well, it's something about that conversation or that chat and text interaction that leads to that good outcome, that leads to someone being safe, someone feeling like they were connected and that they're satisfied with that call. And when it doesn't go well, it's also something in that conversation. And so that has really been the focus for us, is like, how do we develop AI such that it is like that human evaluator, but it doesn't care if it's actually 10 million contacts. Next slide. And so that's been the work. I've been at this for 15 years. Got involved with it quite a bit before ChatGPT. So this is a paper that we published. This was a collaborative paper with Talkspace, where Lyssn's AI, including some AI developed on empathy. It's exactly that scale that Terry Moyers developed. We trained AI to learn how to evaluate empathy. And we evaluated 22 million conversations from 5,000 providers. And so there's 5,000 purple dots, and each one of those purple dots represents the average empathy across all clients and all sessions with clients. And thank you. We have some outcomes. And so not surprisingly, when you're talking with someone who's really empathic, this is, of course, not crisis care. This is more traditional outpatient counseling. You stay engaged. And if you're talking with someone who's not terribly empathic, you drop out. And we found something similar for client satisfaction, as well as changes in depression symptom. And so one of the things I want to emphasize here is that This is an example where we developed narrow AI, which is we had a very particular problem we were trying to solve. Can we develop an AI that could evaluate a particular set of skills, fidelity to motivational interviewing, empathy? And we train the AI to do exactly that. It's very, very different than general systems like ChatGPT, which are really trying to respond to everything under the sun. Next slide, please. And so we have done similar work. This is collaborative work funded by NIH with Protocol Services. Protocol provides 988 services for the state of New Mexico. They're also one of the national backup centers. And we did this process initially with safety assessment. So both developing AI that would detect potential suicide risk in the caller, as well as really the kind of key components of a thorough safety assessment. And so this is reporting some of the results, and the question that we're asking here that these bar charts are showing is how well does the machine generated answer fit with the expert human evaluation? So someone that listened to an entire call and made their evaluations. And so at 100%, the machine's answer is totally indistinguishable from what the expert human provided. And so this is, some evidence that with the right type of training, we can teach these AI models how to do what the expert human evaluator can do. Next slide, please. And if you can, thank you. But what I really want to emphasize is this is painstaking work. You can take I would not recommend this to anyone. You can, take a transcript of a crisis call and feed it to ChatGPT and tell me how risky was the caller and did the call taker do a thorough suicide risk assessment, and it will give you an answer. Is that answer any good? I have no idea. When we develop these narrow AI systems, we're doing the painstaking work of actually having expert humans evaluate many, many calls. In this case, just under 500 calls were in this initial work. A little more than 200,000 different individual utterances were evaluated. And then then becomes the examples that the machine learns from. And another name for AI is machine learning. And this is an example of that. We're giving many, many examples to the machine, and then it starts to see what are the particular types of words, what's the variability of types of words. I heard in our last session some of the particularities around chat and text and slang. And so we need to get all of that diversity into this training data. Otherwise, we have the potential for AI models to be biased. So there's a lot of painstaking work to do this right. Next slide, please. So once we have a trained set of AI models, we've evaluated them, and if we have reached the conclusion that they're valid and robust, then we can start to look at, use them as if they were that team of human evaluators that doesn't get tired. So we did some initial work with Protocol. This study is ongoing. We'll finish up later this year. Next slide, please. And so we took that measure of empathy and we applied it to, in this case, just under 1,400 chats. And one of the things that was really interesting to me, I am a clinical psychologist by background, but my specialty area was not crisis, is to see how the diversity of call takers, where they may be getting the same information about the safety assessment piece, but there can be wild discrepancy in how empathic that interaction is, where some people are just kind of popping through the questions like, do you feel suicidal now? Have you ever felt suicidal? And they're not acknowledging what's being said. They're just kind of popping through their questions. And other folks are really skillfully getting the same type of information about the safety assessment, but in a very warm, empathic style. is it okay if I ask you a few questions, sensitive questions? Have you ever felt suicidal? Are you feeling, suicidal now? Wow, that sounds really hard. Can I ask you a bit more about that? Those just kind of soft skills that really help with engagement. Next slide, please. And if you could just click out the remaining information. And then, we also find kind of in the opposite instance, and this is a modified version of what we found in the research with protocol. But we did find some examples where someone was expressing, if not directly using the words suicidal, profound hopelessness, and instances where absolutely there should be some assessment of suicidal ideation beyond the fact that that should be the standard of care for 988 calls in general. And this was an instance where there was no evidence of that in this particular chat exchange. So, at a high level, we can find examples where we want to really highlight strengths to celebrate, and then also areas where we might want to provide some additional training of feedback and supervision. Next slide. Yeah, so that particular study with protocol, we're right in the midst of a randomized trial where we're turning on feedback from the AI system to folks over time. I'll just mention in passing that this type of AI development is what we then kind of package in different software products at Lyssn, and that focuses around training, quality improvement, and documentation. Next slide. So now we're going to take another step back and kind of think about there are every week there are more AI solutions, more claims about what AI can do, and so how should we think about this within behavioral healthcare? This is my time trying to put myself in your shoes as someone who might be thinking about purchasing, investigating AI solutions within your particular setting. Next slide, please. If you are someone that has some deep skepticism about AI, I am here to tell you that that is warranted. The reality is that right now it is a bit of the Wild West. I know nothing about this company. I know nothing about this software. All I did was go to the App Store and type in AI therapist bot. This popped up, as did a number of others. It is basically purporting to give you AI therapy from an AI trained bot for stress, anxiety, depression. From where I sit and what I understand, I think this would need FDA approval. I took the time to read through the terms and conditions and privacy policy. There's no mention of HIPAA. There is very clear that they could use your data in any way they want. They'll share it with anyone they want, and that the terms and conditions are ruled by the laws of Spain. So skepticism is warranted. Next slide, please. So yeah, that's fine. Why don't we just pop all these out? So a few thoughts. The reality is, I think AI is here to stay. There are tools that are being developed that are useful, and there are folks that are doing it in thoughtful, ethical ways. And so a few ideas, principles really. One is to develop an AI governance policy. And this is no more and no less than a policy that says, here's how we're going to think about AI, where we would apply it within our organization, where we would not apply it within our organization, and potentially levels of rigor in terms of the evaluation of that. Documenting who is going to make the decisions, likely a committee, so who's on that committee. Because one of the things that we don't want to do is we don't want to undermine trust with our staff as we're rolling out some AI tool and they're like, where did this come from? How did you evaluate it? I don't feel good about this. Like, they may still feel that way, but an AI governance policy just provides clarity for all involved in terms of how the organization is going to make decisions about AI. I've had to update this part about regulations because under the previous administration, it looked like we were headed towards AI regulations. The current administration has really thrown that out and made it very clear that they don't intend to have any regulations. I think that as an AI developer, that is very troubling to me. I am very much in favor of AI regulations. When you look at other places or within the US, there are principles that have already been articulated. The EU does have some AI regulations. And really one of the key principles is transparency. Transparency, clear indication about where the AI should be used, should not be used, clear indication and transparency about the training data, how much of the training data, what was included in that training data. You don't ever want to be in a situation where you find out that the AI was developed on data from a college counseling center and you are planning to use it in an opioid treatment program. Those types of mismatch between training data and application is where we can really get into problems. And then finally, for clinical applications in particular, three kind of principles and three questions to ask about is, convince me of the validity of this. If I'm telling you that, hey, we're going to evaluate suicide risk assessment, how? Is that something that we made up? Are we using a standardized tool? And we are using a standardized tool, and that is really the right answer, I think. Is it reliable? Can I show you some data that actually demonstrates how well the model is replicating expert human judgment? Because in just about all the applications that I know of, that's really fundamentally what we want to do, is that the model is replicating something that an expert human can do. And then finally, one of the great risks here is the potential for bias. Bias is a very, very general term, just meaning that the model is giving some answer, but for certain subsets of data, it's giving an incorrect answer, but we don't know that. And that can be incredibly problematic with AI. And so really the highest standard of care is that there is specific study of the AI algorithms for bias. So it's great if we can say, here's what's in our training data, and it's a really diverse set of training data, and we think it's really applicable to your setting. The gold star over and above that is actually doing a study where you're looking at is the type of feedback that the AI is providing to different call takers, is it equally accurate across different types of call takers by race and ethnicity or LGBTQ status or veteran status or age? That's really the kind of highest standard that we ought to be striving for. And that has been a very whirlwind. I think we're not going to take questions right now. I think I'm going to hand the baton to David. But thank you so much.
Dave, that was outstanding. And I certainly have a lot of questions that I hope I get a chance to ask both of you when we finish hearing from Dr. Mohr. So Dr. Mohr, turn it over to you. And just to give people a little introduction, Dr. Mohr is going to be talking about digital mental health and those digital patient-facing technologies, of which there are a lot, and his considerable experience in developing and evaluating those. So the floor is yours, Dr. Mohr.
Thank you, and that was thank you, Lorrie, for inviting me to this. And I am thrilled to be talking to all of you today. Dave gave a great talk, and that's it's hard to follow him. So, but I will, as Lorrie said, I'll be talking about sort of patient-facing digital mental health, and I'm supposed to tell you in 20 minutes everything that you need to know about digital mental health. So. So buckle up. I'll give you a brief definition. I'll review what the scientific data tells us. I'll say something about where we are currently with regulation and reimbursement. I'll talk about what we're finding out about implementation in real world healthcare settings, and then There's a couple of slides that are probably duplicative, but underscoring, sort of where we're going in the future with generative AI tools. Go ahead, next slide. So, we probably all know about digital mental health apps, and so that is essentially kind of what we're talking about. They can also be delivered through internet sites. There's sort of more and more virtual reality tools. So there's a lot of different kinds of tools, but essentially they have kind of similar components in that there's some psychoeducation, there's some skills training to try to help people learn how to implement those psychological skills and strategies. There's reminders, and importantly, there's 24/7 access where if somebody wakes up in the middle of the night in a panic attack or some difficulty, there's something there that can support them. Next slide. So, there are lots of apps out on the App Store, more than 10,000 mental health apps over the, by the last count. And this was a nice paper by a colleague, Amit Bomel, who looked at, how much they're used. So he looked at apps mental health apps that had 10,000 uses or more. And so within 2 weeks, there was a 96% abandonment rate. Right. So, and we know that with behavioral treatment for common mental health problems like depression and anxiety, it takes more than 2 weeks. It takes 3, 4, 5 weeks before we begin to see symptom change. So, and you can see from the graph that the vast majority of people are using them once or twice and then quitting. So this is not going to, the availability of mental health apps might be nice to have, but it is not going to change the public health crisis that we're in with mental health. Next slide. Before we go further, I want to make this distinction that is emerging between wellness apps and digital therapeutics, which is a term that's used by the FDA and in industry. So wellness apps are for their claims are for general health, lifestyle management. You don't need any evidence. They're not regulated. Any Joe or Josephine can throw together an app and put it up on the App Store. A digital therapeutic, which when I'm talking about digital mental health treatments, that's what I'm talking about. Their aim is to treat or manage or prevent a disease or a disorder. So it's making a claim about depression, anxiety, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder. The evidence it's supported by evidence, which is typically randomized controlled trials, and it's regulated. And right now, for the most part, that is the FDA. I personally, there's a lot of shift around that we can talk about, but I'd also sort of put under that healthcare systems that are sort of regulating their formulary. Okay, next slide. So the scientific evidence for the vast majority of the studies have been done in depression and anxiety, and the evidence is very, very clear. There have been hundreds of trials showing strong effectiveness, very consistent. The effect sizes are equivalent to what we see in psychotherapy or pharmacotherapy. And it's also, most studies see that the effects are stronger when they're supported by a human. So having a human in the loop helps people stay engaged and helps people benefit more. In schizophrenia, it's fairly consistent. They can be moderately effective, and they're typically used as an adjunct to ongoing care. The bipolar, there are some trials that show good results, particularly for depressive episodes in mania. There are some that haven't, so the data is a little bit more mixed. But certainly for common mental health problems like depression, anxiety, I should also put PTSD in there. There's strong evidence. Next slide. And so what do we mean by human support? Well, we know that if you can keep a person engaged for longer, they're likely to benefit more. There is also a lot of evidence that the person supporting that person does not need to be a licensed clinician. You can train peer specialists to deliver that care, and it's just as effective. It's true that that the focus of that support, it's better if it's not just on adherence, since if that coach is just reaching out and saying, did you use it? Did you use it? Did you use it? It gets annoying, and it also is not very helpful. But if that coach can kind of help the person use the tools to manage the kinds of problems they're having, then it can be much more effective. The communication can be, synchronous or asynchronous. We're finding that most people would prefer to have the communication over text messaging. but it can also, we also do it when people want calls. We do that with calls. While the trials have shown pretty consistently that people do better with coaching, when we roll this out, and we've seen this elsewhere, when we roll this out in real world settings, we find that about half the people don't want to talk to anybody. So about half the people that agree and download a digital mental health app, they, even despite being contacted multiple times, about half, they just don't want to talk to somebody. And that's also, I think, interesting, because those are probably people who aren't going to go to behavioral treatment, but they're getting something. And about half of the people do find it helpful to have a human in the loop. Next slide. So let me talk for a moment about where we are with regulation and reimbursement. So most digital mental health treatments fall under what FDA, sorry, I'm going to get into a little federal jargon here, but most of them fall into what's called class 1 or low risk devices. So they're under what the FDA calls discretionary enforcement. So the company has to register with the FDA, but the FDA doesn't require any kind of review or clearance. Some companies have gone through, started early on going through and trying to get review and clearance because they felt that the imprimatur of the FDA would help them with marketing. And now currently it looks, for current billing practices, you'll see that that's a requirement. So as of the beginning of this year, CMS now has HCPCS codes in place to support reimbursement for both the device and for clinician support. So the clinician support is in 20-minute increments. The device, they require that it has to be cleared by the FDA, and currently that support has to be provided by a licensed clinician. That's, I think, unfortunate. But it's also true that when CMS issues these codes for the first time, they're never very workable. There's a lot of things that we could go into, and I won't right now, how these are problematic. I think many people in CMS recognize that, and they're looking for data to see how to change these codes to kind of change them over time. But the beginning, having these codes, in place has been a huge step forward for digital mental health. Next slide. A few other places to be aware of for information. Peterson Health Technology Institute, is potentially a big player. So they are a very well-funded, large, independent, nonprofit organization with a lot of ties to payers. They are, I think, kind of aiming to position themselves as an alternative to FDA to provide information that is more useful to healthcare systems. They provide evidence-based evaluations and of the clinical benefits, and also budget impact analyses. They cover all of digital health, not just mental health. But they recently, a few weeks ago, issued a report on depression and anxiety, and there were 15 products that they reviewed that met their criteria. 2 of those were FDA cleared, and the remainder weren't. Some of them were self-guided. Some of them included what they call blended care, so coached. And it was pretty clear that these were all effective. And they also have information in there on the budget impact for all of them. I think clinicians, a helpful tool is the mindapps.org. So that provides, they have reviewed, I think it's over 600 apps right now that are on the app stores, and they provide information that includes information on privacy and security, treatment approach, app features. And, clinician, your patients are using apps, a lot of them. And, it could be useful for clinicians to know which apps they're using. And if they want information about what those apps are, what the risks might be, this is one place they can go for good information. Next slide. So where are they being implemented right now? So up until January, there were no good reimbursement mechanisms. And as of a month or 2 ago, I think there had been 300 claims put through to CMS. So those codes aren't really being used yet. But there's a lot of places outside the fee-for-service model that they are being implemented. So I think now it's around 14 states now have contracted with digital mental health companies through their Medicaid programs. And that is, That's nonpartisan. So that's from blue Massachusetts, Mass Health to Sooner Care in Oklahoma. So they're states are beginning to try to use these. California is integrating digital mental health at the county level. And a lot of healthcare systems, particularly like Kaiser Permanente, has stood up a platform that has now served several 100,000 people. And a number of other healthcare systems have stood up, particularly those that don't have to rely on fee for service, have stood up digital mental health care systems. Next slide. So, I'll just take a moment and mention the Society for Digital Mental Health. So this is an organization that I and some colleagues, Stephen Schuler and others, put together about 4 or 5 years ago. And one of the main missions of the society is to to support the integration of digital mental health into the American healthcare system. And so it's a big tent organization. There are researchers like me. There are, companies. There are healthcare systems, payers, venture capital. And so it allows us, with all of those people at the table, to begin to identify problems and begin to work on them. And one problem we saw was that there's a lot of implementation going on, but none of it's made public because these are done as business arrangements between companies and healthcare systems. With one exception, they publish. And so we thought, well, we put together a work group that included representatives from 7 of those healthcare systems and 10 of the companies. And then we interviewed 20 other people from healthcare systems and companies to understand what was going on with those implementations, what was working, what wasn't. And from that, we put together a playbook. And down at the bottom there, I have the Frontiers Digital Health has the academic paper. And if you go to this website, there's also a more user-friendly version of that playbook, what came out of that. And so just in brief, where you put it in the care pathway was important. So, for example, we've tried, and others had tried putting it in as in a wait list. So people, you typically in behavioral health care or psychotherapy, you have a long wait list. And so if you say, we can't take you now, but we have this other thing, that doesn't work. Because people get pissed off. They're coming there for one thing that they're expecting, and you're trying to help them, but they see it as giving them a second-rate treatment, right? So you want to find places in the healthcare system where it's before they've made a decision about what treatment they want. You've got to have a recommendation from a trusted provider. Putting up a website, putting it on the website that we have this thing available, nobody's going to use it. And even the trusted provider alone is not sufficient. So around 30, 40, 50% of patients will say, I want that, but almost nobody follows up. Just like nobody follows up when a primary care doc refers the person for psychotherapy. It's only around 10%. It's no different for apps. And so having what is increasingly called a digital navigator, somebody who can then, as soon as the person says, yeah, I'm interested, get them registered get them to download it, get them registered, that helps getting them going. Implementation is hard. I'm sure all of you who've tried it know that it's a grind, so setting up quality assurance, continuous quality improvement processes. I mentioned that some people want support, some people don't. We've seen that, when people don't want support, they don't stay on as long and they don't get as much benefit, but they do get some benefit, right? And so these are people who might have gotten nothing otherwise. So meeting patients where they are, and in that, some of the more successful implementations have not contracted with one company, but they've contracted with multiple companies to create a digital mental health ecosystem that can meet the needs of different patients. Next slide. Now, Reliant Medical Group, which is in Massachusetts, they were purchased by Optum, who then had an interest in cost savings. So they have stood up what I see as a very, very successful model. And so what they did a very large pilot of about 1,100 people, and they're now scaling it up to across the system. So, a patient is referred into behavioral health by a physician, and the behavioral health clinician then does an evaluation. They have an ecosystem of at the time this was done, they had contracts with about 10 different companies. They would the behavioral health care clinician would assess the person, and in that assessment was also would provide also information about which tools to start the person off, which tool would be most likely to be successful. And then once they were if the person agreed to begin the treatment, the behavioral health care specialist got them onboarded. And if they couldn't get them onboarded within 24 hours or 48 hours, it was what they found was they never got onboarded. So it really has to be quick, ideally in that meeting. They received data from the companies on how the person was using the tools weekly. And then you can see then there were symptom severity assessments done at weeks 2, 4, 6, 9, and 12. The behavioral health care clinician would reach out if they saw that the person was struggling, wasn't having problems. But for all patients, there was a review at 6 weeks. And this is, I think, really critical. So they really did a good job, I think, of implementing measurement-based care. This wasn't just digital mental health out there and you throw the patient out there and leave them alone. They at week 6, they reviewed how the patient was doing, whether they were improving or not, whether they were using the application, whether they liked it or not, and revised the treatment plan. And so people who were not doing well got triaged up to a higher level of care. People who were doing well continued. Sometimes there were adjustments made. So it's integrated into the processes of care. It's not just a standalone treatment that's out there on its own. Next slide. So, of the 1,100 patients who were offered the treatment, just under half accepted it. They wanted it. 38% were registered, and 29% activated. That means they actually got started. After they were registered, they actually started using it. So, not everybody wants it, but that's a good chunk of people. And it was effective. About 70 of those who activated and used it, 74% showed clinical improvement, which was a drop of 50% or more on their reduction in symptoms. 22% had no change, and 4% deteriorated. And what's not published, but they have talked about publicly, is that they've seen about a $250 savings per patient. So there is a return on investment, which is why they have decided to go ahead and scale it up across the system. I will say that return on investment does not account for the costs of implementing. So the cost, implementation is a bear. It takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of time. So that doesn't include those costs. But once the thing is up and running, there's the potential actually of improving care. And I should also mention that, they saw that the adherence to the digital therapeutics for those who activated was better than the adherence to psychotherapy. It was just easier for people to stay engaged. Next slide. So I'll kind of close out here, just adding on to some of the things that Dave says. I agree 100%, but just a slightly different perspective. So generative AI tools are out there. I mean, there's ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini. There are companion bots like Replica, and 49% of people with mental health challenges who use generative AI are using those tools for support. And they're not designed, and Dave did a good job of talking about why that's a problem. But the point is that they are getting some benefit out of it. We don't know what, but they're continuing to use it. But there are problems, and just to put a finer point on it, there's inaccurate or dangerous advice. These sort of off-the-shelf tools are designed to tell people what they want to hear, right? So these are sort of documented problems. There's so dangerous advice. Somebody's thinking about or wants to stop medications. These tools will reinforce it. There have been, pretty public problems with suicide, particularly among youth. They validate and reinforce delusional thinking. There's concerns that they can lead to social withdrawal because people become, would rather spend time with their companion bot than go out and see friends. And, Dave talked about the privacy and security issues. Next slide. But there are a host of tools that are being designed specifically for mental health. And I want to talk about this that was done by, it says Heinz there, but the lead researcher was Nick Jacobson at Dartmouth. And he's done really careful, good work on generative AI tools for mental health. And this is, I think, the first large randomized controlled trial of one that he calls it Therabot. It came out a few months ago. And he saw really nice, strong effects for depression, anxiety, and eating disorders over 8 weeks. So really, these again is kind of the size of what you'd see for, for in psychotherapy or any mental health treatment. People were really satisfied. The average use was 6 hours over 8 weeks, right? I mean, that's more than people spend in the average. If you take the average number of times that people go to show up for psychotherapy, it's probably a lot less than that. And they used it an average of 24 days. Can you click the next one? But it was not problem free. So this is a tool that was carefully developed, well trained. And even though, and out of 26,000 messages sent, so they were very careful. They reviewed every message that was sent, and if there was a concerning message, they reached out to the participant to correct it. So out of more than 26,000 messages, there were 15 times that they had to reach out to patients because the response for safety didn't meet their criteria. I don't know specifically what the issues are. And then there were 13 times that they reached out for inappropriate messages, like the bot somehow started providing medical advice or something. So that may sound like a small number out of 26,000, but this is a little over 100 participants. So a few of those participants actually got messages that were not that were inappropriate, and that's in a bot that was designed for mental health. So I think the caveat to be careful is a good one. This is coming. I suspect that these problems are going to be worked through. This is not at all to say it's this is a bad direction. But I agree with Dave. We're not ready for prime time. It's not ready for prime time yet. And I think Nick Jacobson, who's the author of this paper, would agree with that. Next slide. So just to summarize, the sort of general digital mental health treatments, the validated ones are effective at treating common mental health problems. Successful implementation is really hard. It takes time. It takes effort. As one of in that work group, as one of the implementers said, when you're training clinicians on this, you're not training clinicians, you're training the entire healthcare system, because healthcare systems are not familiar with this. So it's really, it is a challenge, but if it's done, there's a potential for return on investment and to be able to provide care to larger numbers of people. And I do think we should say that generative AI is here. Your patients are probably using it, and your clinicians should be aware of that. They are being used. I will say there's a sort of a generative AI tool that is being used in Akron Children's, but it's being used in the context of treatment. So with a therapist who's there, who's also reviewing it. So, I mean, I think it is coming, but we're not there yet. So that's it. Next slide. Just, there's my contact information. Again, I urge you to, if you're interested in this, join the Society for Digital Mental Health. It's free. You'll get newsletters. And I am really happy to also contact with any of you any of you further. Certainly my mission right now is to facilitate and support implementation. Thank you.
Wow. Two powerful presentations, a lot of information about an area that so many of us are anxious and skeptical about. So let's start with the skepticism.
Yeah.
And so I think that there was a Harvard Business School researcher that said AI will not replace humans, but humans with AI will replace humans without AI. And so it just points to the fact that I think it's here, that we've got to figure out how to incorporate it in our lives, in our systems. And I was very curious, Dr. Mohr, when you talked about, it was Dr. Mohr, I'm not sure which one of you was, who talked about California and the fact that several states, 14 states, including California, have started to integrate, this is you, Dr. Mohr, integrate this into their systems. Can you say more about that? What exactly did they do? What tools did they, and what was the process? How did they
Yeah.
get there? How do they even think about getting there?
So, I can't, I can give a fuzzy response. I don't know, my knowledge of the details is a little weak. So in California, my understanding is that their mental health programs now are split up and operated by, they're funded by the state, but they're operated at the county level. And so California also is unique in that they have a tax of 1% on
Billionaires tax.
right, for mental health, right? So they have a good budget for mental health, and they're using that. Part of what they're doing is trying to implement, using that to implement innovative solutions. And so a lot of counties and very different kinds of counties, very urban counties like Orange County, as well as very rural counties, are trying to implement digital mental health. And a colleague of mine, Stephen Schuler, there has been doing, a lot of the outcome evaluations. And, it's been really difficult. It's not, there's a few places where it's beginning to work, but it's very difficult to work it into the systems of care because it does require some staffing. And the people that do that staff aren't, were not readily available. And, and clinicians, I mean, you can't ask more of clinicians at this point, right? I mean, everybody is overworked. And so, the places where it's starting to work is where they have identified kind of lower level people where when a physician or a therapist or a behavioral health person makes a referral that they can step in and take over. But that takes, I mean, within county systems, creating that kind of change takes time and effort. At the state level, and this will speak to another challenge. What I'm aware of is that both Massachusetts and Oklahoma contracted with a couple of companies, both of which went under. And so there's a lot of churn in this industry right now. There's no good reimbursement pathways right now. So these companies are all running on venture capital and the next round of venture capital. These companies are constantly on death row, and then they get another infusion of capital that extends their sentence another year or two. And so that's been a problem. I think for one of those companies, they got, another company purchased their product, and so now they're back in. But that is one of the things that I didn't mention in the evaluation process that healthcare systems said was really important was an evaluation of the company and the financial stability of the company, because you don't want to contract with a company that's going to go out of business in 6 months. So that is one of the challenges. But they have been, I think there was, in Massachusetts, one of the products that they used was for was an adjunct for treatment for opioid addiction, and they did have good success with it. It improved people's adherence to the treatment programs. It improved outcomes.
So it sounds like in the Reliant study in particular, or the Reliant process, that they were actually trying to use the generative AI tool in.
It was not generative AI.
It wasn't?
They're basically, there's not a lot of generative AI in there, and as Dave said, there's no clear way to regulate that right now. FDA doesn't have a process for regulating AI. So these are processes these are just sort of like apps that you get off the App Store. It'll have some psychoeducation. It may be tailored in some way, but the tailoring is done with what we call decision trees. So there's no machine learning going on in
okay, but they used whatever the tool
Yeah.
that they used was in lieu of therapy. So they were trying to actually engage people in the use
It was
of the
Yeah,
app.
it was presented to the patients as this is our process. We like to start people that you look like somebody who would respond well to starting with digital mental health treatment. Would that be of interest to you? Or, and they review the options. You can get medications, you can see a psychotherapist. And so about half of the people said, yeah, starting.
Was there any way to characterize it? Were younger people more interested, or could you characterize the population that appeared to be more interested in that kind of an engagement?
I don't recall.
Okay.
I can say that in our, we've done through our center, we've done implementations in rural healthcare settings in South and North Carolina, and in Chicago. We had one that did not go great at Rush because COVID hit and there was a bunch of problems with the whole healthcare system. And then at Northwestern, we did one. So we have some experience, and we've seen that. I think we've seen that the average age was what you'd expect, like high 30s, low 40s.
Okay.
And so, younger people use it. The other thing that I'll say generally, like in the research data, is we see that, you may be able to get younger people, but younger people tend not to be as adherent. Like when you get an older person, older people tend to do what you ask them to do. So if they get onboarded, they're much more I should say, are, much more compliant.
I've got a couple questions from the chat, but I wanted to, Dr. Atkins, as systems think about this, I think you gave some really good advice around setting up a governance structure to make some, have a group of people, a committee, if you will, think about what's useful in terms of integrating the system. As you know, we've got really serious behavioral health workforce shortages. So there's always an interest in seeing what kind of efficiencies can be created.
Absolutely.
And some of these tools will be useful, of course. And even if you're not, they can be used for diagnostic. We don't even have time to get into that. But in treatment support, probably more realistically, right? So as we do that, again, so the governance structure is important, right? And so how do you suggest that systems go about establishing that? Do they start with, for example, just embrace the whole wild west and figure out all the glossy new opportunities, and look at them and, oh, this sounds good, I think I'll try this? Or do you start with, hey, what does my system need? Where are our gaps, and start there? I mean, what is your thinking about how to approach thinking about this work?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. You should always start with, where the, perceived need is, and trying to map that need to where you think some of the best tools or solutions are. I would also go back to what you were commenting on a minute ago, which is, kind of AI will not replace humans, but humans with AI. And that underlies, there's really a spectrum, right? If sort of traditional care is just human only with no technology support, and maybe an AI therapist bot is technology only, there's a lot of places in between where the technology is serving to support and potentially extend the human provider. So that could be like some of our software where there's after action review. The AI provides an analysis upon the session that you had, provides you feedback, and so it's helping you to maintain and enhance skills. There are ways in which the AI could potentially provide feedback during a session. So actually in the moment is providing some feedback about how you could better engage or better treat your client. And so as long as the human is in the loop, meaning that there's a human provider that ultimately is making the treatment decisions, I think in the near term, those are both the safest and the kind of options for using AI that have the clearest evidence and support thus far. As we push more and more towards truly autonomous AI solutions, which is like the one example I showed in terms of a AI therapist bot, and David highlighted the one paper that we know of right now in terms of a truly generative AI therapist bot. There will be more coming, but I think that kind of human in the loop piece of supporting a human provider is probably our best safest route in the near term.
I wish we had more time to talk about, I have so many different questions, including the dangers around bias, the admonitions that you gave about the data sets that are used to create the algorithms and how you have to make sure that they are unbiased, or at least some attempted data harmonization.
Yep.
But we do have a couple questions in a chat quickly. And I just want to raise the issue of whether or not AI companies have been, it looks like there were 2 minor welfare lawsuits alleging that AI caused a death by suicide of a 14-year-old user. Have you heard of companies being sued because of their work?
I mean, that is the most tragic, sadly, kind of well-known example. And this goes to what David highlighted in his talk, that there are examples where it's not even an AI tool developed for mental health care. This was just a kind of generative AI. I think it was character AI, or I don't want to. But it was not even designed for mental health care, but people are using these general purpose tools to provide support and to try and access even informal mental health care. And there is now a lawsuit, and I think we will see more of them.
Yes,
Because
yes.
there are so few guardrails around how these general purpose generative AI platforms get used.
Which is
Let
troublesome,
me
if you say we're moving into an environment where there's not going to be much regulation. Dr. Mohr?
I just want to, add that I think people are using these in that way, and I think this is really important for clinicians to understand and assess, because, clinicians to know if their patient is using one of these companion bots in a way for mental health treatment.
Yeah, I am so sorry we're out of time. I actually took more time than we were allotted, so I'm going to have to move us along. But thank you so much. Very interesting conversation, very interesting presentations. I really
Thank you
appreciate
so
it.
much for having me.
And
Thank you.
we'll continue the conversation on some level going forward. Thank you so much. I think we are at break time, and we will take a break. And we come back, you'll see a short video, and then we'll kick off the next and final sections of our meeting this morning. So enjoy your quick break.
Today is about us coming together as key partners in delivering mental health care services across our broad district area. And today is really about us focusing on our joint regional plan, and it's about bringing our key staff and key services together to have a conversation around what we do and how we can do it better.
So we started in 2020 with a joint regional plan, which was written by both of our organisations with Central Coast Local Health District. We're now coming towards the end of that 5-year plan, and we're looking at what we've done well, what we've achieved, what some of the barriers have been, what some of the enablers have been, and where we would like to move forward with the joint regional plan for the next 5 years.
The focus today is really around putting the consumer at the centre of what we do and our communities, and how we can best meet their needs at a local level and then more broadly.
And we also know that we are stronger when we partner and we do things that are integrated and provide services that are holistic for people, rather than doing things separately that people really need to go to search to find.
One of the key aims in terms of our strategic plan is to focus on how do we build up the partnerships and strengthen it so that we can address some of the longer term challenges we have. There are so many pieces of work which we are undertaking, which have improved services. But what we'd like to do at this stage is look at the long-term systemic challenges we have. And the only way we can do it is by collaborating, strengthening, identifying the gaps, and then trying to work on strategies jointly.
For me, it's bringing the providers into the conversation, because they're the ones delivering the service. So I'd love to see, big meetings with the providers and hearing what gaps are in the community that the LHD can fill, because the goal is to provide a holistic program. So where can the LHD plug in to support that holistic program?
We think of our partnership as planning, but the PHN delivers a range of services to us, to the people in our community, that enhance our service delivery and mean that we get so much better care coordination for the people that we work with. So today, in working through the strategic plan, we can nut out what works in that, what needs to be enhanced or improved, and where we need to go. So it's been a fantastic opportunity to do just that, get to know each other, understand each other, and really understand the lenses through which we see and work.
The focus of the Joint Regional Plan has been a number of key working groups. We've provided people with time and space to meet in their working groups and to work through those opportunities, their strengths, and how we can move the whole plan forward.
It's been really good to meet everybody here, and I think integration is such a crucial part of what we do, really trying to think of the health system as one health system to improve the patient journey from primary care to allied health to acute services and then back down again. And it's nice to just have some time to chat in general and get to know each other a little bit more, find out who else in the LHD I might need to interact with, and I've already done that, which is exciting. I've written some names down. It's good to hear about what else is going on as well and see where I can provide support.
Brian and I both work in quite a important role in the community, so I think it's really important for us to be able to sit down together face to face, which we don't always get to do, but also some input from our other colleagues in both PHN and H&E.
Some of the work we're doing crosses over, but it's the same idea. So we obviously know through our community that it's translating through to the work we do today. So we know we're hitting the mark. So that's the exciting part of this.
The plan's been really helpful in terms of having a really kind of concrete reason to come together and think about how we work together. And so there will be parts that we both have primary responsibility for, but often there's areas where we have dual responsibility, or there's bits where we need to both be playing in the space well, or people fall through the cracks.
What role we actually both play, I think, has taken us some time and to work through, and you know, what level do you come in and at what level do I come in? And so to come in on those activities and actually really tick a lot of them off, which we're really proud of, but then set the trajectory for what we want to do next, I think is great. And we've got, great collaborative.
So as we're coming towards the end of the joint regional planning process for the 2020 to 2025 period, we're looking at engaging a consultant to work with us to refresh the plan and to put forward a new plan for the next 5 years to really capitalise on the partnerships that we've started to create and the work that's starting to develop between the two organisations.
Which is really important with the strong focus on mental health in our communities, in how do we support and connect with our consumers, but also to recognise that there's a broad spectrum of need from mental health right through to the management and support of those with severe mental illness. So really exciting times for us as we celebrate what we're doing well, but also to move forward into our next plan.
Welcome back, audience. It's now my pleasure to kick off the second half of today's event by introducing Mr. Mark Williams. Mr. Williams has worked in the field of human and social services for over 2 decades and is currently employed by the Illinois Department of Human Services Division of Mental Health as a certified alcohol and drug counselor, certified recovery support specialist, and HIV/AIDS educator. Mr. Williams has dedicated his personal and professional life to wellness and recovery efforts, instilling hope to the hopeless and help to the helpless. So we're so happy to have you with us, Mark, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Jones. And I'm gonna go ahead and say you have moderated excellently over these past 3 Wednesdays. I wanna give a shout out to Brenda Hampton and the UIC Crisis Continuum. Perfect for what we're doing today. So I am a person with lived experience. I am a person in recovery. I am a person that believes wellness and health is important. And for this presentation, I want to say that those 4 terms are synonymous with one another. Lived experience, lived expertise, recovery and wellness and health. And I put it that way because some people feel like they're not in recovery from the tradition of what recovery is with 12-step support, Dharma recovery, celebrate recovery. Some people just don't buy into that, and that's okay. Some people don't feel like they may have lived experience or lived expertise. Well, that's okay, because for today, again, those terms are going to be synonymous with one another. The first thing I'd like to point out is this forum is about collaboration, about building healthy relationships, about building rapport. And I want to say those things are synonymous with one another as well. Some of the things that I had to work with as Dr. Jones read off some of my credentials is collaborating with those grassroots agencies that deliver substance use treatment, mental health treatment. For a very long time, they were stigmatized. Once an addict, always an addict. A person can never get their mental health together. Well, I want to say because of what we're doing and what we're doing really, really well is smashing those stigmas. They told me that there was no hope and there was no help. But as Dr. Jones read off, there is hope and there is help from some of those communities that we've built over the past 30 years. And they look so different today. We just got off of this presentation with AI and technology and the advances that has taken part. Well, along with that, working with municipalities. I'm in the Chicago area. I'm actually in Chicago and working with suburban townships and cities and working with the county and Collar County, excuse me. Working with the state, and yes, I am a state employee, and I'm gonna talk about that in a minute. But working with our collar states, assuring that social and human services get delivered to our consumers in a way that makes our on common ground, trying to reach that common goal for our consumers. I think that coming up next is a law enforcement presenter, and working with law enforcement has really shown that reentry and that carceral system can change. And that was something that really, how can I say, set my life back, because I was one of those persons that hospitalized incarceration. And it took a judge to say to me, Mark, we're going to order you an assessment. And today I look back and I'm really grateful for that, because one of the agencies that works with the criminal justice system sent the counselor in, and this counselor had a folder with my name on it. And when he walked in, he just threw the folder aside and he said, Mark, what's going to be the difference this time? You know how to do those things. And there was a moment that I had to think. And the only thing that I can say is, I don't know. And you can hear a deaf silence in the judge's chamber. And he said, that's the best answer you could have made. So for a long time, being honest was something that I didn't know how to do. And a lot of us who came from this didn't know what that looked like. And that was my first opportunity to look at what rigorous honesty looks like. So working with substance use treatment programs, working with mental health treatment programs, the 988 number is such a strong piece in social and human services. The warm lines, those text lines, they really are paramount for our consumers who are struggling with those vulnerabilities. I'm a counselor, and Dr. Jones read that off as well, but I'm a counselor that really works with other counselors, and I have a therapist. So collaborating with therapy programs and things as such have really, really been important. I can't emphasize enough with the presenters who have already taken part over the last 3 Wednesdays and really presented some outstanding information, and not only just presented the information, but how to use that information, which I think is also a paramount piece in us really giving hope and giving help and building these communities and utilizing people with lived experience. Emphasize that enough. And with that, I'm gonna go ahead and say thank you, and I'll turn it back over to Dr. Jones.
Thank you, Mark.
I'm sorry.
I'm think
I was on mute. So many thanks to you, Mark, and congratulations to all you have done to succeed. I'm sure everyone participating in today's event. And when I say how grateful we are for you sharing your perspective on the importance of collaboration in behavioral health and your journey. And so, Brenda, I'm going to turn things over to you, Brenda Hampton, who is a member of the Behavioral Health Crisis Hub.
Good morning. I am Brenda Hampton, and I am Director of Community Linkages with the UIC Behavioral Health Crisis Hub. It is my pleasure to introduce our next and final session of this day and of the forum, including 4 fantastic speakers who will be discussing building collaboration at the local level for alternative response. Now is the work that we have to do. Now we are bringing together people in the community to really help put forth the vision of CESA. So, first, we will start by hearing from Dennis Duke. Mr. Duke has served in a dual role as president of Unity Point Health, Robert Young Center, and vice president of Unity Point Health, Trinity Regional Health Systems since 2015. His work provides leadership in the community, connections, access to care, hospital engagement, and service delivery innovation. Next, we will hear from Chief Darren Galt, a highly respected law enforcement leader with nearly 30 years of experience and Chief of Police for the Moline Police Department in Illinois. Chief Galt has spearheaded a cultural transformation at the department, modernized operations, and strengthened community relations. Chief Galt has worked to facilitate CESA not only in Region 2, but throughout the state. Our third speaker is Heather Butler, a seasoned 911 professional with over 18 years of dedicated service in the 911 industry. In her role as 911 coordinator in DeKalb, Illinois, Ms. Butler has been instrumental in shaping and improving communication systems through active participation in multiple national and local committees. She currently serves as co-chair of the Regional Advisory Committee for RAC number 1, where they collaborate with local and regional partners to implement CESA within the region. Last but not least, I'd like to introduce Dr. Sara Scruggs, who is founder and CEO of Aruka Institute of Healing, a rural behavioral health and wellness center serving Bureau, LaSalle, Marshall, Putnam, and Grundy counties in Illinois. Dr. Scruggs also serves as clinical assistant professor of psychiatry for the University of Illinois College of Medicine in Rockford. Dr. Scruggs serves in a leadership role for the National Rural Health Association, the Community Behavioral Health Association of Illinois, and Community Emergency Services and Support Act, CESA in Region 2. Thank you all for being here with us today. And Dennis, let me turn it over to you to start. So panel, Dennis, as Region Advisory Committee Chair, let's start off with your thoughts on local level planning and collaboration. Why is this so important, and how can collaboration be actualized?
Okay, and I apologize for my face being whited out there. I'm not sure how to remove that, but anyway, first, just thank you to the team for putting all of this together. Have been great presentations, especially interested in the digital. And Mark, thank you for sharing your experience. I think collaboration at the local level is so important, and that's where the work actually gets done. The RAC helps to establish that structure, helps to provide a roadmap to what we're going to talk about more here in a bit is the sub-regional committees, but establishing that collaboration with key partners, key stakeholders such as your 590 providers, your EMS systems, your PSAPs, and in my mind, most importantly, the law enforcement part of the equation. And we are fortunate to have Chief Galt as our partner here in Region 2 and in our sub-region location here in the Quad Cities.
Chief Galt, you have been highly recognized as a champion in Illinois and spokesperson in just your message about CESA. So how do you convey that to other law enforcement departments throughout the state about the importance of collaborating at this level to really bring about positive change?
Well, it's certainly a culture shift for law enforcement. As you know, responding to mental health calls has been the responsibility of law enforcement probably since the 1800s. The shift towards recognizing this as more of a healthcare problem and less of a law enforcement response is a significant culture change. And in addition to being a culture change, it's a complex adjustment. This is new law in Illinois, new protocols that have been rolling out slowly and trying to get our handle around it. And it's particularly a big concern for areas of the state that have less resources than maybe major metropolitan areas. Communities have historically relied on law enforcement for everything because there are police officers or sheriff's deputies in virtually every community across the country. So changing the rules and protocols and philosophies is going to take a shift in mentality. And most importantly, it's going to take time. We cannot do this all at once. There's undoubtedly a public safety component to some calls at certain risk levels, as we all agree. But law enforcement will continue to play a certain role in our safety and the core function that we provide. But because these calls a lot of times will come through a PSAP or have some sort of component for 911 and connection to law enforcement, we have to get PSAPs, law enforcement, EMS, and healthcare all working together, and that's really our only chance for success.
Thank you. Ms. Butler, Chief Galt used that word PSAPs, and I don't know if everybody in the audience knows what a PSAP is. So let's start by you explaining the terminology PSAP, and then I'll ask the next question.
Yep, PSAP is commonly used across our industry, but a lot of people don't know what it stands for. It stands for Public Safety Answering Point. So there's PSAPs obviously across the nation, and a lot of them also called our ECCs or emergency call centers, but that's where all your 911 calls go.
So for lay people, that's a 911 call center.
Yep.
So PSAPs are new partners in this system, but they're not new players. They have always had a critical role in emergency response. So why are PSAPs so central to the collaboration process?
I have always looked at PSAPs as the glue that keeps everybody together. So we have that central connection to law enforcement, fire departments, EMS, and really any other resources within our county or jurisdiction, because we never know what calls we're going to get. It may be a true emergency, but a lot of people call us, or a lot of our centers answer non-emergency calls too, and it may be for animal control, it may be for just a food pantry or looking for resources. And to go back on something Chief Galt said with like the culture shift in this is even our PSAPs are having to learn that they have a new resource and how to use that resource. And then also then sharing that resource, which is 988, with their partners in emergency response, the fire departments, the EMS system, and their law partners.
And so if there are PSAPs listening to this discussion today, and they're still on the peripheral of this CESA thing, what would you say to them in terms of why it's so important that they be central in the CESA evolution?
Well, I think bottom line, everybody in every PSAP wants what's best for their citizens. And so they just need to learn what resources are available in the area, how they can utilize them, get involved with your RACs, ask questions, reach out to our 98 centers in the area, ask them, how can I learn more about what you do and how can I share what I do with you so we understand each other and help each other out and do what's best for our citizens.
Dr. Sara, you bring the mental health component to collaboration. Why is it important for community mental health to be an anchor in this process?
Yeah, I think, well, obviously, as the mental health professionals responding to these calls, we view this as an opportunity. And the way that our 590 crisis care in our state and CESA have sort of realigned or refocused this care back out into the community, trying to, support people in their natural environment, trying to keep them out of unnecessary inpatient stays. We really need to, I believe, approach this with a way that builds trust. We need to build trust with our community members. We need to build trust with our partners, many of whom are represented on this call today. We need to know that we need to go. This is not a primarily telephone service anymore. Crisis historically in behavioral health has looked a certain way. This is a mobile response as the gold standard when necessary. So we need to go, we need to show up, we need to be reliable. I also, back to the opportunity in our area, which is more rural, we cover 5 counties and we cover 3,000 square miles. We only have 2 brick and mortar facilities, so we don't have a brick and mortar in every little town and village. So when we go on these mobile responses, a lot of times this is an opportunity to engage someone for the first time. So we need to view it in that manner. And that's why that in-person response, especially on that first visit, is so important. The last thing I would say is, as a community provider, being flexible in the evolution and the rollout of CESA, I think is really important. 988 is a wonderful triage component of this. Right now, the majority of our calls don't come in through 988. I believe they will one day, but I think we need to be flexible in how we're receiving these calls and building that reliability along the way. Eventually, hopefully, all the calls or the majority of calls will go through 988 and things will more standardize in a greater way. So those are kind of my initial reflections on this from the provider standpoint.
So as you talk about sub-regional committees and the collaboration that's needed to bring all of the entities together, what would be the one most important element that should be on the table to really bring people to the table and keep them connected? People will come out of curiosity, but will they stay connected? Dennis, what would be your response?
Yeah, I think all of us participating in this call today, we all believe in CESA and what its intent is. Unfortunately, there's still a lot of opportunity to bring people along, make sure we're educating people about the realities of CESA. Dr. Sara mentioned being flexible. So all of those things are going to be important to bring to the table in a broad structure. But as you look at keeping people engaged, keeping people involved, it really comes down to making sure that there's a consistency in your meeting cadence, ensuring that the information that's going to be shared can be applicable to all of the participants on the call. And, you have to take into consideration the variances or the differences between the sub-regional committees. We know there's some that are from the metro area. We know there are some from the rural area. And that in itself, creates new realities and potentially new barriers to people engaging in the work. Oftentimes, people's view of this may be skewed by what they know their resources to be in their particular sub-region. And so making sure that there's a message of yes, it needs to be standardized, but at the same time, it can be individualized to all of the different sub-regions based on those resources. But getting back to some of the components, you absolutely need that consistent meeting cadence. If there's data available, and I think the longer we stick with this, there will be data available for us to share. I think stories, success stories, also stories that provide the opportunity to review the work that we're doing and how we respond, all of those things in a transparent way are going to keep the conversation going and keep people coming to the meetings.
Thank you. Chief Gold, law enforcement has been critical over the years in terms of responding. And now that pendulum is changing a bit. What would you say to officers and also other administrators within law enforcement why this collaboration is so important?
Well, I think education is really the key here. It's extremely important. You know, law enforcement and all the partners in the system really need to be educated completely on the intent of CESA, what we can and can't do, how it's going to change law enforcement response, or the order of things that are going to happen. You know, in many particularly rural areas, as I travel around and teach CESA to law enforcement leaders, we find some resistance. Law enforcement leaders are insistent that police will go first and secure the scene on a lot of these because of the stigma that mental health is dangerous. It's whatever that terminology is used, that's the first thought, is that there's going to be a potential for violence. But everybody needs to know a few things. First, mobile crisis responders and other healthcare professionals that are already in our community, that are in the field every day, are not asking for our help. Police don't even know about 80% of the calls that the mobile crisis response in my jurisdiction are already responding to. That was eye-opening for me. But when the call comes first to the police department through a 911 center, we immediately go into protection mode, and we immediately start to think that this situation needs police response. Second thing is that police, we can't do this alone. You know, I know there's been over the years, probably the last 20 plus years, politicians, activists in the community have made this call for more officers to be trained in crisis intervention. And the analogy here is that if training every police officer on CPR, but not having a healthcare component to take over at some point, is pointless. Healthcare has a role here to play. We have to have a partnership here. And the other thing that everyone else needs to understand is that courts and case law are starting not to support law enforcement handling these mental health calls when there's other options available. So, for example, Armstrong versus the Village of Pinehurst is one of the cases that I bring up a lot in my training. And kind of the summary of that is that the court said when the purpose of taking custody of an individual is to protect a person from harming themselves, any force that causes harm is contrary to the mission of protecting that person. And so, you know, when I started 28 years ago, when we would respond to something, we'd arrest a person, put them on a cot, and off they go. Well, if they were injured in that, that was kind of part of the response. It just happened, and that the courts have made us rethink these issues, that force is not justified in many of these areas. And then recently, in Nevada, there was a case, Scott versus Smith, and the ruling reinforced that officers may not be shielded by qualified immunity when excessive force is used in situation involving individuals experiencing mental health crisis. So we have to rethink this. We have to take a pause as law enforcement and assess the current environment and maybe ask why we are still doing some legacy procedures that may need to be revisited.
Thank you. So Dr. Sara, in your region, I know that your region has been very proactive in bringing people to the table to have discussions about each other, what they offer, what they do, what they can provide. Talk about that a little bit, and why has that been really the foundation of success for that sub-regional committee?
I want to mention Brandon Miller, who leads Illinois Valley Regional Dispatch. It's part of our priority dispatch for our SESA pilot. He's been remarkable in bringing various partners together. The value in that is, well, first of all, I want to say as a provider, we feel like it's our responsibility to bring the key stakeholders to the table. We need to acknowledge what is within our scope and what isn't. We also need to acknowledge that when we encounter someone in crisis, their mental health crisis component is usually only one factor that needs treatment or intervention. Housing, travel, obviously a referral to the next step as far as a provider, and really thinking from the client standpoint, like what provider is, do they prefer? This is patient-centered, patient-driven care, and how can we set them up with resources that are close to where they're at so that they can access those resources effectively? So getting the key stakeholders there, which in our area is, the housing authority, it's the food pantries, it's the transportation providers, it's all the social determinant support, it's other providers. It's not just your 590 providers, but your outpatient providers that may in those counties provide service and being mindful of payers. Do they only take commercial insurance? Do they take Medicaid, et cetera? So making sure that we get everyone there at the table so that we can collaboratively break down those barriers for our people that are in crisis, and we can get them to their next step efficiently and effectively.
Thank you. Two areas we have not talked about in terms of collaborative partnership is EMS and fire. And while they may not be involved, fire particularly unless there is a crisis that involves fire, EMS could be very critical in the role of collaboration. From the PSAP perspective, Heather, talk about the role of EMS and why they should be at the table as we plan for this change called SESA.
They absolutely should be at the table because oftentimes they're going to now be that backup for mobile crisis team if needed and still not have law enforcement present. And I know DeKalb County has met frequently for the last couple of years, and it's been a big topic of how EMS plays into it, when to transport, when not to transport, what happens if it turns into a refusal and that type of thing. So those conversations need to be had so that way the communities have a plan in place and how they can support each other. And the PSAPs are driven by our, we call them SOPs, or standing operating procedures. Protocols and those procedures play into how calls are dispatched, who goes, and then sometimes the outcome of those calls. So we partner with law and EMS to set those up based on resources, based on their protocols with the EMS system. And so those discussions need to be had, and that's why everybody needs to be at the table so that way we can make sure all the pieces fit together as we move forward to implement SESA.
And so I'll just throw this out in general and anyone can respond. If you had a message to give to the other areas of the state, the other regions of the state, the other local municipalities of the state regarding collaboration under the umbrella of SESA, what would that message be?
I think I'll go first. I think it's not to be scared of something new. I think that's the biggest thing is coming from a mix of rural areas and a county that's blessed with resources, but I have neighboring counties that I'm very close with that don't have resources. I think it's just scary that they don't know what's going to happen because they don't have close resources or they're not aware of them. So learning, education, as we've said over and over, learning what's in the area, getting to know your partners in this. And as Dennis said earlier, that cadence of meetings, like keep them going. Even if you really don't have much to discuss at a meeting, get together anyway, socialize in other ways. Just make sure that you guys are there to support each other, build that trust, because the community then is going to see you have that trust and you believe in each other to make this work.
Yeah, Brenda, I think Heather hit that nail on the head. I've taught kind of introduction to CESA throughout the state, probably, I don't know, maybe 10 times. And a lot of times when I arrive and do these presentations, this is the first time that these individuals have ever met each other. And so when we started doing the CESA regional meetings, they were pretty big. Like I think at one point, one of the meetings that I facilitated was about 80 individuals, executives of the different sectors. And, they're always probably, even in rural areas that I've done them in Southern Illinois, they may have even only had 30, but it was still a lot of people there. And almost every meeting that I have facilitated, they did not previously know the 590 provider or the mental health provider in their area. There was no relationship. They had no idea who that individual was that ran that mobile crisis response team or their mental health services in their area. And so I said, if you get nothing else out of this meeting that I'm facilitating, please get this person's name, email, and phone number. And so I think that that's probably one of the number one things that to support Heather's points here is please meet all of your people, get everybody on a spreadsheet, get everybody's emails, get everybody's phone numbers, and start having conversations. So for example, we had a suicidal call that became a little bit complicated. It was not really a law enforcement matter. It was just somebody that was suicidal, and we had the individual went and made pre-arrangements at a funeral home and actually got reported by the funeral home to the PSAP. And so it just kind of became a little bit confusing on who was going to respond. And we were reaching out directly to the mobile crisis response team. They got a little bit confused. And so I just went direct with the director of mobile crisis response, and we tried to clean up the communication. So it's just simple things like that. And there is a HIPAA problem, and I don't know that we'll ever be able to change that because it's federal law on how much information is shared. But you've got to at least open up lines of communication and get some communication going and break down some of those barriers. And I'll close with this, is if you haven't read the statute, if you're in the EMS sector, for example, if you're not familiar, you haven't read the statute itself, please do, because the CESA statute starts out and tells us why that statute exists. And the General Assembly pointed out in this statute that it's necessary in the public interest to provide emergency response to individuals requiring mental health or behavioral health services in a manner that is substantially equivalent to the response provided to individuals who require emergency physical care. So if you start there and say, what are we doing for somebody that has a broken leg or a heart attack or whatever, and then start to reimagine how you're going to respond to somebody that has a brain injury, a mental health problem, I think you'll find a lot of people that are just a little bit taken back by, we never thought about that. And so that's the first step.
Absolutely. Thank you. Sara, Dennis?
I'll go Dennis, if that's okay. I just wanted to piggyback on what both speakers said, really communication, and both in this large meeting format that we have when we meet quarterly, but the one-on-one oftentimes is where you can kind of get more granular. And the communication, I believe, needs to happen at the executive level, where you talk about policies. Where do our current policies conflict? Or where do they potentially create a barrier for us to be able to provide this response? But also at the direct service provider level, they need to know one another. They work shoulder to shoulder out in the community. So, just bringing the chiefs and the, CEOs to the meeting isn't as effective as having multiple layers of meetings, either all together or separate. That trust piece, I'll come back to that, We need to know that when Chief Galt shows up on scene, we as providers need to know he's going to do what he needs to do or what he said he's going to do. And he needs to know the same about us as providers. This is not something that happens quickly. This is a change for a lot of people. Those one-on-one conversations, having humility, you don't know it all, being willing and courageous enough to admit that, to ask questions that talk about how this might play out and, what's my role, what's your role, really getting granular with those conversations. And last is access. And Chief Galt mentioned this, taking a case study and dissecting it as a group can help create a more practical understanding of what this needs to look like.
Absolutely, thank you. And we have a few questions in chat, but one was directed at Chief Galt. Can we get the case citations for the legal cases that you discussed? So we will make those available and we will put that in the information.
I'll put it in the chat right now for you.
Okay, very good, thank you. And this is more of a comment. I think all entities should embrace uncomfortable conversations, be comfortable with uncomfortable conversations, and keep ethical boundaries. The last question, more so comment. As a mobile crisis response team supervisor, I have to say it has been extremely challenging to engage in having conversations about mobile crisis response programs, how they work, and how to collaborate with law enforcers, and other first responders. It seems that so far the connections are based on will and interests of individuals instead of being based on policies and procedures, which are more long-lasting. Hopefully, these will be changed at the city and state level in order to close the gaps that we still have regarding mobile crisis response and first responders. Any parting comments, Dennis?
I would just end with, as all of us continue to facilitate this work across the state, in our RACs, in our subregions, rely on your partners, rely on the champions that you've identified in each sector. And even though we may have champions identified in each sector, not everyone in that sector is behind the implementation or fully understanding CESA. Relying on those, if it's an EMS issue, relying on your champion in EMS to help move things forward is an important element to this work. The same with law enforcement, the same with any of those sectors. Just continue to rely on the resources that you've identified.
Thank you. Let me thank all the panelists today. Thank you so much for being so gracious in presenting. Thank you so much for allowing us to call on you whenever we need you for your wisdom and your guidance. I will now turn it over to Dr. Jones.
Thank you, Brenda. And again, on behalf of the Behavioral Health Crisis Hub, I would like to thank this panel and thank you for your not only presenting today, but for your extraordinary work in your community and being examples for other communities across the state. I also want to thank all the panelists. Remember, we talked about 40 speakers, and these people volunteered their time to come and share a wealth of information with our audience. We are so incredibly grateful to all of you. And we hope you enjoyed today's session and really the 3 days of sessions throughout the month of June. As we wrap up this morning and wrap up the 2025 Behavioral Health Crisis Continuum Forum, I'd like to take a moment to, again, thank my team for all the work that they did in putting this together. If you missed any of the previous sessions or would like to review any of the presentations from the forum, please be reminded that all sessions have been recorded and are available on the Hub website. And the link is available in chat. So we're happy to be able to post these, and some people will be putting links in their LinkedIn profiles. So speakers will also have access to their particular portions of their presentations. Please remember that your voice matters to us. We're really trying to decide whether or not we want to do in person or virtual and the kinds of topics that really resonated with the audience. So please fill out your evaluation using the link in the chat via the QR code that you see here on the screen, or by remaining on the Zoom platform until we end the session, where you'll be automatically offered the option to click on a link taking you to the evaluation. So on behalf of the Behavioral Health Crisis Hub, I want to thank you for attending the 2025 Behavioral Health Crisis Continuum Forum and wish you a wonderful rest of your summer. So take care in this new era. Always let us remember to take good care of ourselves, each other, and our communities. Thank you.